Hi again guys, and welcome to, of course, another review and breakdown of a car from the selection of 9 vehicles from the 1.29 patch, and this time we're going to an icon, again a returning face, of course, from the classic, you could say supercar world, pretty justifiably, but a car which went through kind of different stages as far as its purpose. Initially more of a rally-bred vehicle, ultimately more of a supercar. I personally wish it had gone more toward the first of those two, because a Group B or even Group S style Ferrari would have been very cool. But at the same time, I am kind of happy that the first major all-wheel drive car that they made, certainly in a production sense, was the FF, of course my dream car. Now the car in question is the 288 GTO, commonly just referred to as the GTO as well. And this is a car which has some very interesting differences compared to many other Ferraris. It's not this ultimate powerhouse type engine with large capacity, tons of cylinders. It's actually much smaller, much more compact. Again, the rallying roots showing very clearly there. It's relatively lightweight, which isn't too surprising for a Ferrari. And the way that it looks, the way that it delivers its performance, it's just that little bit more raw than many other Ferraris of the time. Ferraris, especially around the 80s, you could say the 70s as well, they had a very specific vibe to them. They almost look like these more long-distance status symbols, which many of them still are. You could even say that my dream car, the FF, is just that. But certainly stuff like the 458, the 430, the 360, they are very much so cars that are designed to be looked at, to make a big impression, to dominate the scenery, and also can quite easily cover long distances comfortably. They're great tourers, but you can also take them around the track and have a lot of fun with them. Now in the case of this car, it doesn't have that kind of vibe at all. It's much more similar to something like an F40. Very hardcore, very angular, very extreme, less forgiving, more brutal, and again, that does definitely lend into the rally purpose, the rally lineage. And although it doesn't ultimately have all-wheel drive, which I think is kind of a shame, it certainly looks like a car which could have easily had all-wheel drive. It looks the part, kind of like the Ferrari Audi Quattro, if you will, or the Ferrari Lancia 037 Stradale. Now in terms of performance, this car is always quick. No matter what game that features it, it's always very fast. Test Drive Unlimited, for instance, used to have it 0 to 60, about 4.6, 4.7. Top speed, you're looking at around 190 in that game, if I recall correctly. In Gran Turismo 6, for instance, extremely fast car, very, very popular one. I can't recall the exact top speed with my tuning, but I think it may have been in the region of about 290 without NOS or slipstream. So again, very fast, very powerful. Now though, of course, the spirit of the game, the tuning in the game is considerably different. The cars in general, in terms of which cars will dominate that is, tend to be more focused on how good they are through corners. Not just for handling, but for their manners, for their steering, yes, but for their personality, the kind of feedback that they give to the driver. The kind of average speed that a car can keep up over the course of a lap, for instance, which is one of the main reasons why stuff like formula cars, modern LMPs and Super GT cars tend to be so good when it comes to lap times, because they all three share that in common. They are extremely good at keeping up a high speed through a corner. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that they are good handling cars. They could still be tricky or challenging, but a car could be tricky and certainly not beginner friendly, but if it's quick enough through corners, it can make up for that and still be an absolute weapon to use. Then on the other hand, you could have something which has fantastic handling, like the new Mini for instance in the game, or even something like a slow classic car, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be competitive, because it could have all the handling in the world, but if it's not fast enough in a straight line, it doesn't matter either way. Like a K car going up against a sports car, most of the time it's not going to win, even though you could say, justifiably, it's the better handling of the two. In the case of some cars, if you can blend both, that's when they get really good. Now this one definitely errs more on the side of being very capable, but also less forgiving. Not surprising at all. Of course, the car arguably should be that way. It's what you'd expect it to be, that's the way it looks. However, I will say that the car very pleasantly surprised me by how good it actually is. Of course, earlier on today I did a Blue Moon Bay N300 tune for it. honestly, I did not expect to do one. I didn't think it was going to be a good car. I thought it was going to be very twitchy, very slippery. Exactly the opposite. Really, really good. Up there, almost as good as the GT40, in fact. Really impressed me. Around the track, it feels a little bit more like what you'd expect the car to be like. Not that it's difficult to drive as such, but it's kind of like the Honda NSX or the Renault Clio V6. They're these vehicles that are very good, especially within their category. The NSX is a great sports car, the Clio V6 is one of the best hot hatches ever made, but they're not forgiving. You have to learn how to use them correctly, and the GTO definitely has that kind of personality profile to it. It's a very rewarding drive, and it's a very competitive car, but you must give it respect, you must use it correctly, but if you do, the car will definitely reward you. This is a very, very competitive Ferrari in the game, as far as classics go, definitely as far as its power. Because again, just like with the GT40, with the Miura, various others, the Mazda RX 500, this is one of those cars which punches well above its weight. It's a very good all-rounder, and actually I think that for those who are a fan of this car, and there are definitely plenty of fans out there, I think you might actually enjoy this car more in GT Sport than you may have on GT6, because although it's not as quick in a straight line anymore, mainly because of the physics and the tuning, it's a more useful car in terms of racing, in terms of track performance, not just as this straight line missile, which it was very good for, but that was pretty much all it was good for. It was never that great as a track car, very easy to beat, whereas now, the fact that you can get this down into N300 means you are going to worry a lot of cars, because that's the same kind of territory as like a high-end hot hatch, some sports cars. I mean, to give you some idea, that's like taking this up against a Hyundai Genesis. That's not exactly a fair match. Now, fair to one side, it's very cool if you're going to use the Ferrari, because you've got a pretty huge advantage, just like with something like a light car company Rocket, for instance. You could put that up against a conventional, say, hot hatch with the same amount of power or even more power, and the light car company Rocket or a Caterham or a KTM or an Ariel Atom will still win, because of course power to weight, much lower weight, better cornering ability, better acceleration. Likewise with this. What it can do with the power that it's given is very impressive. It's under 400 horsepower to begin with. You can tune it up if you want to, you can tune it down. The weight is very good, it's already 1160 kilos, which is very healthy. That's not very much at all. The driving style, the cockpit is a nice place to be. The handling, especially from cockpit view, actually feels very well weighted. I've always liked actually the proportions of the GTO, because although I'm not a huge fan of the car itself, I can certainly see why people would be. And I think I might actually prefer this over the F40, to be honest, if I had to choose one of the two. But if you do choose to fork out the admittedly expensive price of 1.85 million for this car, which is even more than the Zonda R, making it the most expensive car in the pack, I don't think you'll be disappointed, because this ticks all of the boxes that you need it to. You can use it in racing, it's a classic, it has excellent performance, and you can get it into some pretty low classes thanks to that tuning. N300 and upward is a great level to be working out with this car. So although, yes, it is very expensive, I was expecting it to be closer to $1 million. It's almost double that, so yes, it will take a little bit longer for some people to save up for, especially if you don't do Blue Moon Bay, for instance, that often, but overall, I'd say it's well worth it, and that's it for this pick overall. So of course, check out my tune for it earlier on if you haven't yet, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.